Okay, let me tell you something about Yellowstone. We can all agree it's one of the most beautiful places in America. The geysers, the canyons, the herds of bison moving across the valleys. But that beauty is the exact thing hiding how disturbing it really is. In 2016, a hot spring dissolved a man overnight and left nothing of him but his wallet and his sandals. Then nearby, the most popular swimming spot in the park tests positive for an amoeba that kills around 98% of the people it infects. And a couple of miles below the 4 million tourists who picnic on the grass every summer sits the largest active magma reservoir on Earth, and almost none of them know it's there. Here are 25 facts so disturbing they'll change the way you see our beloved Yellowstone. Let's dive in. 25. Gone by morning. On a June afternoon in 2016, a man stepped off the boardwalk at Norris Geyser Basin, the hottest, most volatile thermal field in the park, and by sunrise, there was nothing left of him to recover. Colin Scott, 23, from Portland, had walked about 225 feet from the marked path with his sister, looking for a spring warm enough to soak in, what locals call hot potting. He knelt to test the water. He slipped. His sister filmed it on her phone and couldn't reach him. The spring ran hotter than 212 degrees, boiling, the temperature used to sterilize surgical instruments, and slightly acidic, and that combination worked through the night. When rangers came back the next morning, the body was gone. All they found floating was his wallet and his sandals. And here's what should stay with you. From the boardwalk, every spring at Norris looks identical, the same impossible blues and greens. The park has recorded more than 20 thermal deaths since 1890, and not one of those springs ever signals which will be next. 24. Beneath your feet. The entire central third of Yellowstone sits inside a volcanic crater called the Yellowstone caldera. And in 2015, seismologists at the University of Utah finished the first full scan of what lies beneath it. They found not one magma chamber, but two, stacked on top of each other. The shallower holds around 2,400 cubic miles of hot, partly molten rock. The deeper reservoir beneath it holds roughly 11,000. Enough on its own to fill the Grand Canyon 11 times over. Together, they make up the largest active magma system known anywhere on Earth. A 2025 study put the roof of the upper chamber just 2.5 miles down, closer to the surface than anyone had measured. The shallow chamber alone, if it ever let go, would throw a blast around 2,000 times the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption, the one heard 1,200 miles away. The geysers people come to photograph are just the steam rising off the lid. 23. What's in the water? Near the park's north entrance, just below Mammoth Hot Springs, a hot spring pours into the cold Gardner River and warms it enough to swim. The boiling river, the one place in Yellowstone you're legally allowed to. A study published in 2026 found one of the deadliest organisms in fresh water living in it. The amoeba is Naegleria fowleri, and researchers from the U.S. Geological Survey and Montana State tested 185 samples across 5 western parks. A third came back positive in Yellowstone, at the Boiling River, the Firehole, and 2 more thermal sites, some at concentrations higher than levels tied to past deaths. It does nothing to you if you swallow it. It kills you when water is forced up your nose, where it travels to the brain. Of the 167 Americans known to have caught it since 1962, 4 survived. Death usually comes within 1 to 18 days. There's no legal safe limit for it in the water, and no sign at the Boiling River tells you it's there. 22. Brought back to be killed. In the park's northern range, the Lamar Valley, the most famous wolf watching ground in America, wolves were wiped out by the 1920s. Then released back in 1995 in what's still taught as the country's greatest conservation success. 26 years later, the same system helped take them apart. On a February day in 2021, Montana's governor at the time, Greg Gianforte, trapped and shot a collared research wolf, a female born inside the park, known to biologists only as 1,155. About 10 miles past the northern boundary. He hadn't taken the wolf trapping course the state legally requires. His penalty was a written warning, and he kept the skull. That same year, Montana rewrote its laws to let hunters bait, snare, and night hunt wolves near the park, up to 20 apiece. In the season that followed, roughly 1 in 5 of Yellowstone's wolves were killed. The Phantom Lake Pack, which ranged along that northern edge, was gone in 8 weeks. Every known member. 21. The ground is breathing. On the north rim of the caldera, near Gibbon Falls, just south of Norris Geyser Basin, an area the size of Chicago is slowly lifting off the magma below it. The U.S. Geological Survey announced in January 2026 that the ground there had begun rising in July of 2025. By the end of the year, satellites and GPS had clocked it climbing close to an inch across more than 200 square miles, with over 100 small earthquakes alongside it. The survey is clear that this is not an eruption warning, and the alert level is normal. But here's the part that lingers. This exact patch of ground did the same thing once before, between 1996 and 2004, swelling almost 5 inches before it quietly settled back down, pushed up, the modeling says, by something gathering about 9 miles underground. No one can yet say whether this time it stops where the last one did. A piece of ground the size of a major city is moving right now, and it took a satellite to see it at all. 20. Killed for the cattle. Along the park's northern boundary, near the town of Gardner, Montana, bison drift out each winter looking for forage at lower ground. And that is where Yellowstone helps kill hundreds of them every year. The American bison is the national mammal, and this is the last herd that has lived wild and unbroken since prehistoric times. They're culled over a disease that cattle gave them in the first place, brucellosis, carried into the region by livestock more than a century ago. When the bison cross the line, they're rounded up at a capture facility and sent to slaughter to keep the disease from reaching ranch herds. Here's the part that doesn't hold together. There has never been a single confirmed case of a wild Yellowstone bison passing brucellosis to cattle. Not one. This herd clawed back from as few as 23 animals in 1902 to thousands today. Yet in 2017 alone, more than 1,200 were culled, over 50 times the entire wild population that once stood at the brink of extinction. 19. No warning at all. On July 23, 2024, the ground at Biscuit Basin, a thermal area about 2 miles north of Old Faithful, blew apart without a single second of warning. It was a hydrothermal explosion. Superheated water underground flashing instantly to steam and tearing the surface open, yards from a boardwalk packed with summer visitors. It threw rock and debris hundreds of feet into the air, and chunks of it, some the size of a washing machine, came down across the walkway people had been standing on moments before. Everyone ran. By something close to luck, no one was killed. And here's what should bother you most. One of the most sophisticated volcano monitoring networks on Earth caught nothing beforehand. No earthquake swarm, no temperature spike, no signal at all. These blasts come from the shallow water system, not the deep magma, which is exactly why they can't be predicted. And the USGS calls them Yellowstone's most common geologic hazard. Biscuit Basin has stayed closed ever since, over a year now, and it is one of thousands of thermal features in the park. 18. Closer than you think. In Hayden Valley, the wide grassland at the center of the park, the most dangerous animal in Yellowstone isn't the grizzly or the wolf, it's the bison. A bull can weigh up to 2,000 pounds and run 35 miles an hour, faster than Usain Bolt has ever sprinted. They look slow, almost tame, grazing a few feet off the road. And every season, people walk right up for a photo. Bison injure more visitors than any other animal in the park, more than bears by a wide margin. The rule is to stay at least 25 yards back. At a full charge, a bison covers 25 yards in about a second and a half. That's the whole problem. By the time the animal decides it's had enough, and it gives almost no warning before it does, the distance you thought kept you safe is already gone. 17. The crater in the lake. On the north shore of Yellowstone Lake sits a quiet inlet called Mary Bay, and it is the scar of the largest explosion of its kind in Earth's recorded geology. Around 13,800 years ago, the ground here detonated in a hydrothermal blast. Not lava, but pressurized steam ripping the Earth open. It left a crater a mile and a half across. Wider than New York Central Park is long. The column of rock and water it threw up rose more than a mile, and debris landed 3 miles out. Mary Bay isn't alone either. The floor of Yellowstone Lake holds more than 20 such craters, blown open over the last 14,000 years. What keeps this from being ancient history is simple. The thermal vents that fed that explosion are still active, still pushing heat up into the water, directly beneath a lake where people kayak and fish all summer. The blast that made Mary Bay could happen again, under the boats. 16. They let it burn. By the late summer of 1988, a wall of fire was bearing down on the Old Faithful complex, the busiest place in the park. And for weeks beforehand, Yellowstone's policy had been to let its natural fires run. The reasoning was sound on paper. Lightning fire is part of how this lodgepole forest renews itself. But 1988 was the driest summer on record. The fires wouldn't die. And by the time managers reversed course and attacked them, it was far too late. On a single day that August, later called Black Saturday, more than 160,000 acres burned. The government threw in about 25,000 firefighters and roughly $120 million. And still the flames reached Old Faithful, where crews made a desperate stand to save the historic inn. In the end, nothing human stopped it. The fires went out only when the autumn snows fell. 793,000 acres, 36% of the park, an area larger than the state of Rhode Island, had burned. And as summers run hotter and drier, the conditions that produced 1988 are no longer a freak event. They're becoming the baseline. 15. Erased on purpose. The clearest evidence sits in the park's high country, the mountains along its southern and eastern reaches, where one group, the Tukudika, or sheep eaters, lived year-round for generations, in a place officials would later insist no one had ever called home. Native people had used this landscape for more than 11,000 years, longer than the entire history of ancient Egypt. At least 24 tribes hunted and traveled through it. The Crow, the Blackfeet, the Shoshone, the Bannock. But when President Ulysses Grant signed the park into existence in 1872, that history became inconvenient. By 1882, the superintendent had banned Native people from entering at all, and an 1868 treaty meant to guarantee their access was never ratified. To justify it, officials spread a story that indigenous people had always feared the geysers and stayed away, which conveniently made the land look empty and free to take. Tribal historians have since dismantled that claim, but it held for more than a century, shaping how generations of Americans believed the first national park had always been. Pristine, untouched, and empty of the people who were already home. Quick pause before the back half. The best part of these videos is the comments. Every time, someone adds a detail I'd never heard. So if one of these has already gotten under your skin, tell me below. And if this is unsettling you as much as it did me, a quick subscribe really helps. Alright, back to it. It gets worse from here. 14. The system is loaded. The stretch around the park's western boundary and the caldera's edge, from the Hebgen Lake Fault near West Yellowstone to the Norris area, is one of the most seismically active places in the interior of North America. The ground here moves constantly, with somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 earthquakes recorded every year. Most are too small to feel, but the faults running through it are capable of far more. In 1985, a swarm near the caldera produced more than 3,000 quakes in a few months. In 2017, the Maple Creek swarm logged over 2,400. And the 1959 Hebgen Lake earthquake, magnitude 7.2 to 7.5 on that same western fault system, was violent enough to rewire the park's plumbing overnight, sending close to 300 springs suddenly erupting as geysers. Here's what should sit with you. That fault system is still active, still loaded, and the next rupture, like the last, will arrive with no warning at all. 13. The tree that feeds the bears. High on the volcanic ridges of the Absaroka Range, along the park's eastern edge, grows a gnarled, slow-living tree that may be the most important food source in the entire ecosystem, the whitebark pine. Its fat-rich seeds are what grizzly bears gorge on before winter, the fuel that carries them through hibernation. And it is being killed on 3 fronts at once. The mountain pine beetle, a native insect that warmer winters no longer kill off, now bores through the bark in waves. A fungus carried over from Europe, white pine blister rust, rots the trees from another angle. Across the greater Yellowstone region, it now infects about 1 in 4 trees, double the rate in 1996. And a warming climate is pushing the whole species upslope until it runs out of mountain to climb. The government listed it as threatened in 2022. Living trees still stand, but strip away this one tree and you pull the floor out from under the animal at the very top of the food chain, and everything beneath it gives way too. 12. The Trail of Dead Volcanoes. Look at a map of southern Idaho, and you'll see a giant smooth arc carved across the whole state, the Snake River Plain. That arc is a trail of dead Yellowstones. The hotspot fueling the park today is a plume of heat that has burned in roughly the same place for around 17 million years, while the North American plate slides southwest over the top of it at about 1.5 inches a year. Everywhere the hotspot has been, it blew out a caldera and then went cold, leaving the flattened, scorched lowland that is now southern Idaho. A scar more than 350 miles long, roughly the size of Pennsylvania. Idaho is Yellowstone's graveyard. The park is simply where the plume sits now, which means it's temporary. In deep time, the hotspot will burn on into Montana. This caldera will fall silent and erode away, but not before it finishes what every one of its predecessors did first. 11. One bucket of fish. Sometime in the 1980s, someone emptied an illegal bucket of lake trout into Yellowstone Lake and quietly detonated the food web of an entire national park. The lake's native fish is the Yellowstone cutthroat trout, which spawns in shallow streams where grizzlies, eagles, ospreys, and otters can all reach it. Lake trout don't. They live deep, out of reach of every one of those animals, and they eat cutthroat by the millions. As the cutthroat collapsed, so did everything that fed on them. A cascade researchers traced in 2019 down through 4 levels of the ecosystem, from bears all the way to plankton. The park has spent decades and millions of dollars netting the lake trout back out, and still hasn't reversed it. One anonymous act of vandalism, done in a few minutes, rewired a protected wilderness so completely that no one alive today may live to see it healed. 10. The poison in the postcard. Here's the one I promised you back at the start. The Firehole and Gibbon rivers drain the park's largest geyser basins and join to form the Madison River. And the water they carry out of Yellowstone is laced with arsenic, a carcinogen tied to cancer of the skin, bladder, and lungs. It comes from the thermal features themselves. The same superheated plumbing that powers the geysers leaches arsenic straight into the rivers. In the Madison, the median concentration runs around 28 times the federal limit for drinking water. And when scientists measured it against the threshold meant to protect aquatic life, the river failed. Not most of the time, but at every single sampling event ever taken. The poison is natural, colorless, completely invisible. You can stand on the bank of one of the most photographed rivers in America, watch it run clear and beautiful past you, and never know that every test of it has come back over the line. 9. The disease that can't be removed. Along Yellowstone's northern and western boundaries, where the park's bison and elk migrate out each winter and mingle near cattle country, sits the last reservoir of a disease the United States has spent a century trying to erase. It's brucellosis, a bacterial infection that makes cattle abort their calves. The bitter twist is that cattle are the ones who brought it here, passing it to the park's wildlife more than 100 years ago. The livestock industry has since cleared it out of domestic herds almost everywhere in America, but it cannot finish the job because the bacteria found a permanent home in the wild animals. Around 60% of Yellowstone's adult female bison now test positive for exposure to it, and they can't be cured or cleared. A disease ranchers gave to the wild herd is now the single reason those same ranchers can't declare their own country free of it. The cattle infected the bison, and the bison will never give it back. 8. A good year or a dead one. In the high whitebark forests above the Lamar and Hayden valleys, the survival of Yellowstone's grizzly bears comes down to a single number each autumn: how many pine seeds the trees produced that year. In a good seed year, the bears climb high, gorge on the fat-rich nuts, and stay up in the remote country, far from people. In a bad year, and as the whitebark dies off, bad years are becoming the norm. There's nothing up there to eat, so the bears come down. They move into the valleys, the campgrounds, and the ranch land at the park's edge, searching for calories wherever they can find them. And down there is where they die. In poor seed years, grizzly deaths more than double, and the whole population tips from about 5% growth in a good year to a 7% decline in a bad one. The fate of America's most iconic predator is decided not by the bear, but by whether one struggling tree high on the mountain had a good autumn. And those good autumns are running out. 7. Half the world's geysers. The Upper Geyser Basin, the stretch of ground around Old Faithful, holds the densest collection of geysers anywhere on the planet. And the park as a whole contains more than half of all the active geysers on Earth. Out of perhaps 1,000 worldwide, over 500 are packed into this one corner of Wyoming, alongside more than 10,000 other thermal features. Take every other geyser field on the planet, Iceland, Russia, New Zealand, Chile, and combine them, and you still have fewer than sit in this single park. That concentration alone is an anomaly science still can't fully explain. But here's the part that unsettles me. We can't predict most of them. Old Faithful is the rare exception, and even its timing has drifted over the decades. Steamboat Geyser, the tallest in the world, sat nearly silent for 50 years. Then, with no warning, erupted 32 times in 2019 alone. The one thing Yellowstone is most famous for, the geysers people cross the world to watch, is something we still fundamentally do not understand and cannot control. 6. The night it moved. Just before midnight on August 17, 1959, the mountainside above Hebgen Lake at the park's western edge broke loose. The Hebgen Lake earthquake, magnitude 7.2 to 7.5, the second largest recorded in the continental United States that century, tore down an entire wall of the canyon in seconds. Roughly 80 million tons of rock slid into the valley, moving so fast it pushed a wall of air ahead of it, strong enough to throw cars. Campers asleep along the Madison River never woke up. 28 people were killed, 19 of them buried alive where they slept. Under so much rock, their bodies were never recovered. The slide dammed the river overnight and drowned the canyon, creating a new body of water, Quake Lake, that is still there today, with the drowned trees still standing in it. Inside the park, Old Faithful's rhythm shifted permanently. It happened in the dark, while people slept, with no warning at all. The next one is not a question of if. 5. The air that kills. In the park's thermal areas, and in one notorious hollow in the northeast backcountry that early visitors named Death Gulch, Yellowstone leaks volcanic gas at a rate you'd expect from a volcano in mid-eruption, without erupting at all. The ground here releases up to 45,000 tons of carbon dioxide a day. On its worst days, that's more than Kilauea, one of the most active volcanoes on Earth, pours out while it's actively erupting. Most of it disperses into the open air and does no harm. But carbon dioxide is heavier than air, and on a still, windless night, in a low and sheltered hollow, it can pool and settle, invisible, odorless, with no warning, until it fills the basin like an unseen lake. Animals that wander in to rest never wander back out. Rangers have found grizzlies, elk, and bison lying dead in these pockets, with no wound and no sign of a struggle, simply suffocated where they lay. The land here doesn't always need teeth. Sometimes the air alone is enough. 4. It's in the fish. Below the park's western boundary, where the Madison River runs toward Hebgen Lake, the trout in one of America's most storied fly fishing rivers carry a poison that came straight out of the geysers upstream. That poison is mercury, a potent neurotoxin, leached from the park's thermal features into the fire hole and carried downriver into the Madison. The trout don't flush it. They store it, concentrating it in their flesh as it climbs the food chain, until the fish in this upper reach carry mercury as high as 1.23 micrograms per gram, above the 1 microgram federal limit set to protect the eagles, ospreys, and otters that eat them. Roughly 7 kilograms of mercury wash down this river every year, and while most settles out once it reaches Hebgen Lake, the stretch above it is where the contamination concentrates. Anglers travel from around the world to catch these trout. What they're holding is a fish with a geyser's poison already built into its body. 3. Caught in the crosshairs. Beyond the park's boundary, in the ranchland and hunting country of Montana's Paradise Valley, and the wider 3-state ring around Yellowstone, the protections that keep its grizzlies safe simply stop at the line. The greater Yellowstone population sits at roughly 700 to 800 bears, and as their food thins inside the park, more of them range farther out in search of calories. into exactly the places where humans and bears collide. In 2023 alone, 33 of these grizzlies died at human hands. Shot, removed for raiding livestock, struck on the highways. That's a heavy loss for an animal that breeds this slowly. A female raises just 2 or 3 cubs, and only once every few years. The bear was listed as threatened back in 1975, and twice, in 2007 and again in 2017, the government moved to strip that protection away, only for federal courts to block it both times. So the animal hangs in limbo, not recovered enough to be safe, not protected enough to be left alone. A bear that crosses an invisible line looking for a meal can be perfectly legal to shoot on the other side of it. And every year, thinning food forces more of them to make that crossing. 2. The ground winds. On Firehole Lake Drive, a scenic loop near the park's central geyser basins, the road has more than once begun to melt from below. In 2014, and again in 2015, heat rising out of the thermal ground softened the asphalt until the surface buckled and slumped, bad enough that the park had to close the road until it could be rebuilt. It's a small thing pointing at a much larger one. In Yellowstone, the geology is in charge, and everything people build sits at its mercy. The same lesson is written across the park. Biscuit Basin, where the ground exploded without warning in 2024, is still closed today, more than a year later, with no date to reopen. You cannot engineer your way out of this. You can't pave over ground that melts your pavement, or fence off an explosion that gives no warning. The park can't be made safe, because the danger was never on the surface. It's underneath it. 1. The clock with no numbers. We've been circling the real fear this whole time, and here it is. Everything in this video, the dissolving springs, the rising ground, the poisoned rivers, the gas that kills in the dark, points to one thing: the largest active magma system on Earth, a couple of miles beneath a park that 4 million people cross every summer. It has erupted at world-ending scale 3 times: 2.1 million years ago, 1.3 million, and most recently, 640,000. 2 of those rank among the largest eruptions this planet has ever produced. The most recent threw roughly 2,500 times the material of Mount St. Helens, and its ash is still in the ground today from California to Louisiana. You've heard Yellowstone called overdue. It isn't. The US Geological Survey has said so plainly. There was never a schedule, never a clock counting down to a date. But people hear not overdue and exhale, and that's the trap. Not overdue doesn't mean dormant. The magma is there, just 2.5 miles down. The ground is swelling, the gas is venting, the quakes keep coming. Every instrument says the same thing: it is alive, and it is moving right now. The disturbing part was never that the eruption is coming on a day we can mark. It's that there is no day, no warning, nothing to do but watch the ground breathe. Yellowstone was never a beautiful place with something dark hidden behind it. The dark thing is the park. The beauty was only ever the lid. So that's Yellowstone, the most beautiful place in America, and quietly one of the most dangerous on Earth. Which fact got under your skin? Drop it below. Thanks for watching.